chapter 17. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth had been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have 1 mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
Ready to roll.
Ready to roll. All right, great. Well,
That's
we're
what they
rolling
said
right
in
now,
Vietnam.
I'm sorry, what was that, Darryl?
I said that's what I've heard they said in Vietnam. I flew off the coast of Vietnam, but I wasn't on the ground in Vietnam, so my hat's off to those guys. But lock and load, we're ready to roll, meaning you're getting ready to go out and fight with the enemy.
Oh, boy.
And war is one of the stupidest things in the world.
I never did get to read that book, although it was suggested to me that I read Avril Manhattan, Vietnam, Why Did We Go?
Yeah, I understand. Oh, I've got like about 5 or 6 of his books, but that's a good one. But yeah, his book, especially on the Croatian Holocaust, is outstanding.
Yes, it is. Yes, that's right. That's the one that I wish to get to my brother, because my brother really needs to hear it.
And that's what's really good about that. Are we rolling?
We are rolling right now.
Okay,
Darryl.
good.
So
well,
let me just quick do an intro now. We're just going to take it from the top. Hello, everybody. Welcome on YouTube. We are doing a new series of audios on the Brett Norman Broadcasting Network on YouTube, in spite of being warned by the Antichrist to not have any hate speech, and that is hatred towards any group of people. And that's a rather broad spectrum, wouldn't you say, Darryl?
Well, yeah, we certainly don't have hatred to anybody. We just don't like that when our nation gets trashed.
Yes, Darryl, but you got to remember the accusations of the what shall we call them? The spirit of this world is permeated with this natural man. As far as I see it, correct me if I'm wrong, Darryl, but the natural man knoweth not the Spirit of Christ. And he can't learn how to know Christ if it's not given to him from above.
Right.
Can he? No. He's going to be advocate for the devil. And he's going to laugh his way right into perdition, along with the very man of sin, the son of perdition, the historical Antichrist that we have been talking about on so many of our previous videos. But, the clamps are going to come down and squeeze us hard at some point, and I think this is the beginning, or maybe it's much farther than I had ever anticipated, and I'm just getting warned today or yesterday. But I was just hoping that maybe we could do a session this evening, Darryl, and I'm going to just open it up to you because I know you got a lot on your mind, and I haven't talked with you on YouTube and put up a new session with us in months. So I'm going to just hand it right to you, Darryl.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about conspiracies and assassinations, and since we got something going on in the Middle East, and I used to teach a class on the Middle East at the Army's Intelligence Center and School at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, the U.S. Army Intelligence Center and School, we'll have a little bit to say. Maybe we'll start out with that because that's the shortest one.
Ooh, could I just read a short little quote here?
Sure.
It's on the conspiracy. There's a lot of people that really hate that term, and they want to get it out. There is no such thing as conspiracy, Brett. Yeah, right. Those are the people that I think the Bible tells us that. How did that verse go again? No, that those who lead into captivity shall go into captivity. I believe this is a factor of the doctrine that these people just don't seem to get, is that they have been leading others into the deception of no conspiracy. So therefore, you fall into that pit where you will not recognize a conspiracy because you have led others to believe the same thing.
Sounds good to me.
This is a tough one. I really didn't. I read over this verse over and over. It's in Revelation 13, chapter 13. I forget the verse, but you can look it up, study it. Revelation 13 is very important to get that right, just like Romans 13 is very important to get right. But let's get straight to the heart of the matter, the conspiracy. We're talking about the accidental view of history versus the conspiratorial view of history. The world does not operate on a conspiratorial view of history. It's got to be eradicated, but yet when you really study the facts, that's way further from the truth. It's so twisted around. So, yeah, we're living in a really troubling age, Darryl, where everything has to be ecumenical, and it has to be what's that term, inclusive, right?
Yeah.
And you can't tip the boat, you can't upset the apple cart, because you see the man running the little money changer machine isn't going to be very happy with you. You got to step into the line of the one world government and the one world currency that's coming with a one world religion. It's a trinity, and it's not a biblical trinity. As far as I'm concerned, Darryl, there is no biblical trinity.
Yeah, what we're dealing with, just before we get into the conspiracy theories and conspiracy nuts and all that stuff, I just wanted to mention just briefly, like I said, because I did used to teach a class on the Middle East at the Army's Intelligence Center in school. And the Shiites are right now, they're the bad guys. They're the boogeyman. And what we got is Iran is primarily a Shiite Muslim country, and they're being accused of putting magnetic mines on some of the oil tankers. Now, are they doing it? It's hard to say. Someone's doing it, and someone's trying to get the powder keg that's called the Middle East. They're trying to light some of the gunpowder that's laying on the ground there to get a major conflagration gone. And of course, Iran allegedly, reportedly, shot down a U.S. drone. And again, they're getting blamed, whether they did it or not. And if they did do it, I'm sure it's some rogue elements within their group that, are part of secret societies and that. But it doesn't matter really who does it, just like in conspiracy. It doesn't really matter who the shooters are. It's why they did the shooting. That's
right.
The key
Who
thing,
benefits,
and the motive.
Yes.
And the motive. So right now, we're getting a lot of stuff about, freedom of navigation. The U.S. is the world's policeman, and we've got to enforce freedom of navigation in key areas, of course, like, the Suez Canal or the Strait of Hormuz, which is in the big news right now, the Strait of Hormuz, because they found several of these, I think they were called limpet, but they're magnetic mines, and someone's strapped them up against the side of a couple of these big oil tankers. I think they nailed two of them and blew some holes in the side of them. None of them got sunk, because if you sink a couple large oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, some people say that's going to make traffic going through there very difficult. So that's the big thing in the news right now, and it is Iran's getting the blame, which is a primarily Shiite Muslim country. Now, Saudi Arabia, which is a big ally of the United States, and most of the other countries in the Middle East and North Africa are Sunni Muslims. Sunnis make up the vast majority of the Islamic or Muslim world. And so the Sunnis are being pitted against the Shiites.
Sure.
And of course, Iran is not an Arab country. It's a Persian. It's Iranian. It used to be called Iran, but it's a Persian country. And so they're going to pit Persian Shiite Iran against Saudi Arabia and a few other of its allies that are Sunni Arabs, Muslims, Sunni Muslim Arabs. And they're going to pit those two against each other. And again, that may well be the light or the ignition that gets going to get a major war going in the Middle East, which could lead very easily and very quickly to World War III. So do you have any questions? Because I thought that was just important to put out that they're
Darryl,
the boogeyman.
That's the news of the day. And I didn't get to that little quote. I'll just quick say it here, if you don't mind. I'll get it out of the way and we're done with it. We must choose, quote, we must choose between two paths. Either we conclude that Americans have lost control over their government, or we reject this information as a mere distortion of history. In the first case, we become advocates of the conspiratorial view of history. In the latter, we endorse the accidental view. It is difficult to choose or make a choice because we have been conditioned to laugh at conspiracy theories, and few people will risk public ridicule by advocating them. On the other hand, to endorse the accidental view is absurd. Almost all of history is an unbroken trail of one conspiracy after another. Conspiracies are the norm, not the exception, unquote.
And boy, is that 100% true. And we need to think about, like, the world really does run on conspiracies. Like, if we're in any our little hometowns, in my case in Pennsylvania, or in Brett's case in Minnesota, if 3 or 4 guys get together and hit a local bank, that's called a conspiracy.
Yeah,
when 2 or 3 or 4
right.
criminals get together, that's a conspiracy.
To commit a crime. It's to congregate to commit crime, you know.
Exactly.
And this quote came from The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward G. Griffin. And that's a second look at the Federal Reserve. I haven't read the whole book, but I found that quote very interesting.
And really, and it's not just bank robbers that do that. Anytime you have generally a revolution, a coup d'etat, which we had whenever JFK was killed, that was a big conspiracy, folks. And whether they, like, throughout history, Jesus Christ was killed by a pretty elaborate church-state conspiracy.
Yes.
Julius Caesar was killed by a conspiracy, a fairly elaborate one with a bunch of, and we'll get into that. But the world runs on that, whether it's a bank robbery or whether it's an overthrow of a government, or especially the assassination of a leader throughout history. When somebody important gets murdered, assassinated, it's generally quite an elaborate conspiracy with at least 2 or 3 or more people involved, including sometimes their own Praetorian Guard is involved because they turn the leader over to be murdered.
Yep. And of course, you can't publicly declare conspiracies, because if you do, then you create absolute havoc for the people that run the businesses and everything. And that's bad for business. See, we can't have that.
Here's something that I have here. Conspiracy. This is a note I put into one of my working aids about good books, and I have conspiracy facts versus conspiracy theories and conspiracy nuts. Of course, if you believe in a conspiracy, you have to be a conspiracy nut. And here's what I have that I wrote down. I put the terms conspiracy theories and conspiracy nuts are terms that are often used to marginalize or to launch an ad hominem attack on anybody who dares to challenge, or who does challenge or disputes the official version of tragic events such as assassinations. Such terms, again, as conspiracy theories, conspiracy nuts, and these terms are often used in an attempt to shut down any reasonable debate that disagrees with the official version. Sometimes we call it the government version of the event. Item number 2, conspiracy is more often the rule, as we mentioned, than the exception in the world's history of murdering leaders and other prominent personalities. As already mentioned, Jesus Christ was executed via crucifixion because of a conspiracy that involved elements of both church, i.e. the religious leaders, and state, the Roman authorities, which included Pontius Pilate, the 5th Roman procurator of Judea. Julius Caesar, dictator of the Roman Empire, as we already mentioned, was stabbed to death by a number of people, by the way, because of a conspiracy that involved a number of powerful Roman senators. We all remember, most of us do, I'm sure, the Latin phrase, et tu, Brute. So Brutus was also one of the guys with a knife. You know, a number of guys, they'd like to do it that way, because then if like 5 or 6 people stab you, then they can't always say that you were the one that put the blow in his heart, you know. Anyway, likewise, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated as a result of a very elaborate conspiracy that involved certain elements of the Central Intelligence Agency, other intelligence agencies, some law enforcement organization agencies, like some of the top levels of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, and organized crime, which involved quite a few very top mafia people that most of them, by the way, got murdered before they got a chance to go before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, such as, I'll just mention this real quickly, Sam Giancana, the mob boss that was in charge of everything west of the Mississippi. He was a Chicago mafiosi guy. Sam Giancana when he's getting ready to go testify, he gets, I think, about 6 or 7 bullets to his head to make sure he's dead. Johnny Roselli, I think he was out of New York, mafiosi guy. He ends up getting cut up in little pieces and put into an oil drum that's found floating, I believe, off of the coast of Miami. And there were a number of these guys that all turned up dead before they could get to testify before the committee. So if you work for these guys, by the way, if any of you are out there listening, they often kill you after you kill someone else. Because if they think they're going to get exposed by you testifying, guess what? You're never going to get to testify. They're going to kill you to make sure that you don't spill the beans on them. So if you still believe out there, anyone, and most Americans don't, I'll give them credit for that. Most Americans do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, the lone nut, assassin. And if anybody still believes that, then please do watch. And this is a good movie. It doesn't get into the secret society's connection, the Knights of Malta, because a number of Knights of Malta were involved either mostly in the cover-up of the assassination. But anyway, the lone nut assassin guy that is exposed as being a really phony baloney idea. In Oliver Stone's movie JFK, I'd tell you to get the director's cut. It's rated R for language. There's just a tiny bit of nudity, just a tiny bit, but I mean it's a good one that shows that the mob, the mafia, organized crime, which J. Edgar Hoover said didn't exist. That ought to tell you something about some of these people involved in the conspiracy. But anyway, it involved...
That's right, Darryl. Nailed it.
It involved mobsters. It involved what some people call CIA rogue elements, but a number of these elements were Knights of Malta, such as James Jesus. I don't like to say that. I call him James Jesus Angleton.
That's really interesting, Darryl. I never knew these little factoids like this. Who said this? J. Edgar Hoover?
J. Edgar Hoover was the FBI guy. Says, there's no such thing as organized crime.
You're kidding me. He actually said that?
Yep.
And did people buy it, really?
Well, he maintained it for a while because Bobby Kennedy, who was his boss, RFK, Bobby Kennedy was going after some of the mobsters. And J. Edgar Hoover hated both JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He hated RFK, Robert Francis Kennedy. He hated them with a purple passion. He hated Martin Luther King. By the way, all three of those guys were assassinated by conspiracies, and one of the big reasons why all three of those men were assassinated by elaborate conspiracies was because they were against the Vietnam War. And some people say, oh, no, John Kennedy. No, Kennedy had advisors. He did not want to put a lot of ground troops. And this is brought out in the book, The Secret Team, was then at one time a full Air Force colonel named L. Fletcher Prouty. In his book, The Secret Team, he brings out how JFK was coming out with a National Security Action Memorandum. He was bringing it out. He was going to reduce the amount of advisors. He was very sickened by American casualties in that war, even with the advisors, before LBJ took over the war and running it and really escalated the war. But all three of those men, Martin Luther King gave several speeches and several sermons really ripping the Vietnam War as being immoral and wrong, and that we were the greatest purveyor of violence. That's what Martin Luther King said. He was going to have a very large march against into Washington and stuff, and he was murdered. Bobby Kennedy was running, RFK was running as a peace candidate against, of course, Lyndon Johnson had opted out, but if Johnson would have run, then Bobby was going to be running against him. And Bobby was running on a platform of shut the war down in Vietnam. And of course, I already mentioned JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, wanted to shut the war down. And if he would have gotten reelected, that war would have been shut down. There was billions of dollars being made off of that war, and we can get into that later. But if anyone wants to read what the couple books on which the movie JFK was based, Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy by journalist Jim Marrs, and On the Trail of the Assassins, One Man's Quest to Solve the Murder of President Kennedy by former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who was one of the few people that really nailed down some people. He tried to, and he went after a Knight of Malta, and when we say Knight of Malta, a Jesuit-controlled Knight of Malta named Clay Bertrand Shaw, and of course he brought him to trial, but the guy walked because of, you know how they do with controlling anybody that's brought up on charges that's part of the system generally has a judge or a prosecutor or somebody protecting him. But at least this man was brought up on charges, and it was later revealed that he indeed was a CIA, it's a minimum, a CIA contract agent, Clay Shaw. So, and of course, on the JFK assassination, whenever you had the Warren, I call it the Warren Whitewash Commission, because it was headed up by, allegedly, by the former head of the CIA, and he didn't really want to do it. Alan Dulles, Earl Warren, of course, was the titular head, but the guy that really ran it in the background was a guy named Alan Dulles, who had been fired by John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And Alan Dulles, I believe, was a Knight of Malta. But the key thing is that you got the foxes then looking at protecting the chickens in the hen house or whatever. So Alan Dulles basically ran the Warren Whitewash Commission, and the two guys that were funneling all of the information to the Warren Whitewash Commission were both Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta by the names of the FBI Assistant Director, I believe, or Deputy Director, Carthodique DeLoach. And then you had, he was funneling information between the Warren Whitewash Commission and the FBI. And then from the CIA's end of it, funneling information to and from the Warren Whitewash Commission was also a Knight of Malta named James Jesus or Jesus Angleton. And so whenever you got these people controlling all of the information going up and down to any group that's doing an investigation, do you think you're going to ever get at the truth? No, you're going to get a story about a magic bullet that's flying around, changing directions, and hitting several people, like President Kennedy and Governor Connolly, and then coming out in pristine condition after going through, say, like a wrist bone. And anybody that knows anything about bullets know that they get damaged whenever they hit bone or any dense material like that. So it was one of the most ridiculous, it was what shall we say, besides a cover-up, it was an insult to the American people. And again,
right.
To their credit, most
yes.
of them don't believe in this magic bullet. And Jack Kennedy was probably hit by at least 5 bullets. And again, it's not important who does the shooting.
Darryl, could we call that like a litmus test?
Yeah.
To the public consciousness? Would that be fair?
Yeah, because you've got such a story that's put out, and again, it doesn't matter who the names of the people are. The mob was involved in hiring some of these guys. Supposedly, there were at least 3 assassination teams, a number of guys with rifles, for sure. And probably with each assassination team, you had probably 2 to 3 shooters with each team. You had them in different locations. Some were firing from behind the fence at the grassy knoll. Some were firing from a little bit further down where the fence went further back. and then you had people firing from behind. Kennedy was in a kill zone, and he was, like I said, he was hit probably about 5 bullets. There are a couple really good books that have come out that have investigated not just in Jack Kennedy's but also in Bobby Kennedy's the forensics and looking at the bullet trajectories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and very clearly Jack Kennedy, of course, they tried to do a cover-up with the Zapruder film. They messed with that. They tried to do a cover-up with the medical end of it, which caused a couple people got killed over that, including Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer, who had pictures of the X-rays and what else would have been the X-rays and the actual photographs of Jack Kennedy, and he was allegedly going to leak secrets to the Soviets, is what they told whoever killed him. He was suicided. He shot himself in the head when he was happy as a lark that he was getting ready to retire from the Navy, and he ends up getting what I call suicided, just like Gary Webb was suicided, the guy that wrote a book exposing CIA involvement in drug trafficking and stuff into Los Angeles, and that Gary Webb was suicided. And Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer was also suicided at his office in Bethesda Naval Hospital, and they believe he was trying to get some photographs and X-rays out to somebody, and that he was probably killed by. According to someone that I talked to numerous times on the phone, who was an Army Special Forces captain, Dangerous Dan Marvin, he was asked to kill Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer, and he was told that Pitzer was getting ready to give secrets to the Soviets, which was a joke. That's how they get patriotic Americans to sometimes kill other patriotic Americans, is tell them a lie. And Marvin, who then eventually became a lieutenant colonel and retired from the U.S. Army Special Forces, and he had his own book out, but there was a book also about the murder of Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer. And again, this is all tied in with the JFK assassination. There were over 100 witnesses that were killed. There were the mafiosi guys that I mentioned. There were just a whole lot of people dead. Within, for a couple years even after, they were still killing people that were getting ready to testify, as I mentioned, before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They were still assassinating people a couple years after the Kennedy assassination. So a lot of people died on this conspiracy, and again, they were murdered because they knew something, or they had participated in silencing some of the witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So working for these people, and if any of you are listening who work for them, guess what? They often kill you. Mm-hmm. And that's what Colonel Dan Marvin told me is when they asked some of the people he knew, the CIA would have them kill people, is they wouldn't tell the CIA the route that they were coming back from if they were doing an assassination overseas. They wouldn't tell them the route they were coming back because they were worried that the CIA would probably kill the assassin to make sure that he never talked. So these guys kill their own. And yes, sometimes they really do protect their own. There's a few. But many times you're working for these guys, you're going to die. But I wanted to make that point about conspiracy is that these guys were killed by... Oh, here's another point about conspiracies. I got two more short points. And that is Bobby, Robert Francis Kennedy. And I've got several good books on him. He was assassinated in June of 1968, shot in the head around a little after midnight on June 5th, 1968. He died on June 6th. His brother, President Jack Kennedy, had earlier been assassinated in November of 1963. Again, he was shot in the head. They love to go with headshots on November 22nd, 1963, just like Abraham Lincoln was shot in the back of the head on a rather elaborate conspiracy that involved a number of people, but the shooter was believed to be a Knight of the Golden Circle with a Jesuit front group, the Knights of the Golden Circle, and there were actually about 8 people tried, and 4 of them were hung by the neck, including a woman, Mary Surratt. Back anyway to the assassinations. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April of 1968. He was shot in the head on April 4th, 1968. Yes, all 3 of those men were assassinated by being shot in the head, and each assassination involved a fairly elaborate conspiracy. As with many murder cases, good detectives generally remember to check the list of suspects for those individuals who had the motive and or the means and or the opportunity to commit the murder or assassination. And sometimes in the case of the assassination of leaders and other prominent personalities that had the ability to carry out both the assassination and an elaborate cover-up of the assassination. And again, I gave the example of the infamous Warren Whitewash Commission. So indeed, the average American conducting his own research and investigation often seems to do a whole lot better job, more thorough and professional investigation than do the so-called professionals who often have something to hide and or are being paid to assist in the cover-up, sometimes by threatening and often sometimes threatening and intimidating or ridiculing those witnesses who don't want to go along with the official version. Last point, real quick. President Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Bobby Kennedy were all assassinated because of their strong stance, again, against the Vietnam War. JFK, again, because he wanted to wind down U.S. military involvement. MLK, because he was, many people don't know this. You ought to go up and listen to, they're still up on YouTube, a couple of his sermons, and he gave a very good speech of why he was against the Vietnam War. And, of course, all of this upset J. Edgar Hoover, who didn't believe there was any such thing as organized crime, and RFK because, again, he was running as a presidential candidate opposed to the Vietnam War. So these are important things for us to remember, is that General Eisenhower warned against anybody that went up against the military-industrial, and you can go up and see his speech when he was leaving the office of the presidency of the United States of America. He gave a strong speech where he warned the American people of what he called the military-industrial complex. But what you're talking about is a bunch of bankers, a bunch of very big industrialists and that, and a lot of these guys are members of secret societies. And these people make big money, big bucks off of war, as we know that tremendous book that was written before World War II started, War is a Racket, by a double Medal of Honor recipient, a fellow Pennsylvanian of mine, General Smedley D. Butler, again, a Marine Major General who in his later life said he had been used as basically a prostitute, a whore for the military-industrial complex. He didn't call it that, but he said for the military was used as an enforcement arm for big U.S. corporations. And if you've never read that little booklet, it's not very big. I think you can find a PDF or something of it. I'd urge folks to read that book because Smedley D. Butler, again, a double Medal of Honor recipient. This guy was, if he would have been in the Army, he was in the Marines, he'd have been called a soldier. He was a Marine's Marine. This guy led his troops in battle. He led them in charges. He was the type, you're going to find very few generals these days that do that. He led his men in danger, and then he realized that he was nothing but an enforcement arm for a bunch of large U.S. corporations, which still make big bucks off of war. So those, I think, are important points. And did you want to add anything to what I said, or do you have any questions? Because a lot of money is to be made off of war. You there, Brett?
Yeah. I was in the other room there very briefly. I just wanted to clarify. You said it was Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, right, in 1968.
Yeah, both MLK, Martin Luther King, and RFK, Bobby Kennedy, Robert Francis Kennedy.
And then there
were
was
both...
a character named Malcolm X, too,
Yep.
who was assassinated February 21st, 1965. So, I think it's very interesting that John F. Kennedy was assassinated also during the Second Vatican Council. In that time frame, didn't they start the Second Vatican Council in 1962?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff going on. It's just a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't know much about the connections about Martin Luther King associated with Freemasonry, but I suspect there's some kind of connection there. I'm not claiming that I know everything about these guys, but I'm very suspicious. How about Malcolm X? What was he involved with?
I don't know as much about him. All of the other gentlemen, a lot of disinformation and misinformation was put out about JFK, about RFK, and about MLK, that they had all kinds of... Like for Martin Luther King, they said he had all kinds of communist connections and that. No, that was a deliberate disinformation, misinformation campaign that was put out against him. Whatever anybody's opinions are about Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, or Martin Luther King, nobody has a right to go around shooting people in the head because they don't agree with, government policy or the CIA's policy, etc.
It's all about influence, Darryl, isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, if you're going to influence crowds of people, I didn't live in that time frame. So I was born in 1969. I find it very interesting. I'm more of a child of the 80s, and of course, I think the 80s was a horrible time in America in some regards because you had the election of Mr. Reagan. And, he was a real, he promised all kinds of really grand and glorious things to get in office. And the minute he got in office, he absolutely turned upside down the financial markets for small businesses like my dad's, and my dad never forgave him for that. He was really upset. But, I'm not claiming to know much, I just haven't studied this portion of history with much detail. I'm much more interested in the older portions of history right now because I'm not familiar with them, But, boy, there's a lot going on, Darryl.
Yeah, I picked up a book recently, and I'll mention some books here, but a really good book. 2013 it came out, and I think the newer edition of it is 2015. It's called CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys, How and Why U.S. Agents Conspired to Assassinate JFK and RFK, again, John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Robert Francis Kennedy, by Patrick Nolan, Nolan, with a foreword by Dr. Henry C. Lee, who he's since died. He was one of the top forensic experts in the United States, if not in the world. This book is tremendous. It's, let me see here, it's over 360 pages, and it covers a lot of things. It gets into mind control and using patsies, right. And that's something that we see in a number of these assassinations are common, what I call assassination common denominators. Sometimes you have a diversion, like Sirhan Bashara Sirhan, the Palestinian that allegedly killed Bobby Kennedy. And most people today very clearly believe that there were a couple CIA agents in there that got behind Bobby. Some people originally thought it was the Rent-A-Cop, Ace Security or something, but he was knocked down on the ground. I think they were hoping he was going to shoot Sirhan, and then you wouldn't have never had a trial and worry about him. But he was a diversion, and like I said, they believe he was firing blanks because the amount of flame that comes out from a gun that's firing a regular bullet is much shorter than the flame that comes out from a blank. They think he was a mind control guy, number one, and that he was a diversion because he was in front of Bobby Kennedy. He was in front of him and never closer than 4 to 6 feet. His arm got grabbed right away. And so he's allegedly firing real bullets, which most people believe they were blanks because top forensic experts have looked at this. And again, the A security guard, some people thought he was the one that shot Bobby from behind, but no, there were a couple other guys there. I think a guy in a dark suit and someone else. But everybody was focused on Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, the Patsy, who was he very much appeared that he had been hypnotized or something. He was under some sort of drugs or mind control or whatever because his actions indicated that. But again, it looked like the gun he was firing was blanks. He was a diversion. He didn't get shot. However, Bobby Kennedy got killed by at least 3 to 4 bullets that were fired from very close range from behind. One was right behind his ear, and that was probably the kill shot. I think he got hit in the back or near the top of his shoulder in that, but it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that people actually the top acoustic instruments of today record at least 13 shots being fired, and Sirhan has an 8-shot revolver. So even if he had real bullets, where are you gonna count for the other bullets? The other bullets were fired into Bobby from behind. So it couldn't have been Sirhan. So overwhelming evidence that a Patsy didn't shoot Bobby Kennedy. The Patsy was the diversion. And then another example of a Patsy in those assassinations was Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, we mentioned Sirhan, but also James Earl Ray was a Patsy in the Martin Luther King one, because even I think it was Dexter King, but one of the sons of Martin Luther King's, he and the wife, Coretta, I believe it was Coretta King, they sat down and they talked to James Earl Ray, and that they didn't believe he was the killer. And of course, the evidence seems to be that someone else did the shooting. So in almost all of these things, you've got what I call assassination common denominators. Another thing is you might have a mind control hypnosis victim, in other words, a Manchurian candidate. And, of course, that would be Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. Again, overwhelming evidence. This book gets into a lot of that, the mind control stuff, and the Patsies and that, and it's called CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys, How and Why U.S. Agents Conspired to Assassinate JFK and RFK. So we've got a lot of examples of conspiracies that are based on conspiracy facts, and they're not based on just theories.
Boy. Yeah, Darryl, I tend to think in terms of our media and our push for all these ideologies such as movies set forth. What's really interesting to me, Darryl, is there was a movie that came out when I was about 20 or 19, 18, somewhere in there, called The Last Temptation of Christ. And what really interested me about that movie at that time was the soundtrack that Peter Gabriel did to that movie. And I was really into Peter Gabriel's music, sadly, at the time. And I had no idea what I was stepping into by watching this film. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Darryl, or ever seen it, but it was a film by Martin Scorsese. And that movie is very disturbing.
And what was the name of the movie again?
The Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
Very disturbing movie, especially for someone that's young and not very well studied in the scriptures and doesn't even know about the whole historical, but anyway, whatever. I just wanted to mention that I had, a number of years ago when I was awakened, let's say, by the discovery that one of my clients was using a Kabbalah, I started researching, well, what's a Kabbalah? I mean, the way she talked about it really freaked me out. So I went online and I couldn't believe what I was reading or seeing or hearing about, and all these videos about it. Just like, what are you telling me here? This is really something. So that really opened my eyes at that time, and I started thinking about some of these older things that I was into. Of course, then I find these movies like, well, it's probably not even worth mentioning, but I just found it really interesting to study, what's going on with the movie agenda and the music agenda. And there's all kinds of videos that have been done by people on exposing that. And yeah, it's really serious, and people make money off of making these songs and this ideology to prepare people for the satanic one world government.
Yep.
And the one world religion and the ecumenical movement. It all works together.
It
sadly.
sure does.
And music is such an incredibly wicked thing when you consider how the kings of the earth still take counsel together against the Lord's anointing. It happens on a grand scale, in a grand way that the people have been totally deceived and duped, and they're not really aware. I'm saying I'm the same as everyone else here. I'm not any different.
Yeah,
I was duped too,
Yeah, I want to say a word about conspiracy, and that is,
Please,
look it up
go
in the
ahead.
Bible. Take a concordance and look up the word conspiracy and look up the word conspired. Like a good Strong's or a Young Concordance, or if you have like a Franklin computer-type Bible, just type in those things, and you're going to find out that there were a lot of conspiracies that killed various kings in the northern kingdom of Israel, and there were conspiracies that killed a number of the kings in the southern kingdom of Judah. They conspired. They got together, a number of people, and they conspired to overthrow or kill various kings. And we see that in the Bible. So the word conspiracy and conspired, they're in the Bible, and it happens, and it's a regular part of history.
Exactly.
There's a number of bad books out there, and I'm not going to mention them because I don't want you to buy any bad books. I just want to warn you that there's some bad books out there about the JFK assassination. And these are by authors who, what I call, they support the official version of the JFK assassination. They back and support the Warren Whitewash Commission. So I just want to mention a couple of their names, and they're very, at least one of them is very famous. But you have Vincent Bugliosi.
I've heard that name before.
You have Bill O'Reilly, and you have Michael Collins Piper. And these three guys put out books that support the official version of the JFK assassination. Some of them, like the one book's as big as an encyclopedia, Bugliosi's book. But when they back the official version, then you're not going to get the truth. So I just want to warn you, those books are out there.
Darryl, I was really thankful when you told me about that, because I had put that video up that your Glissman had shared with me on one of his channels what was the name of this video again? On Skull and Bones, oh boy, how come I can't think of it right now? This is a recent video I put up on my channel, kind of related, it's got a bunch of deceivers in there too, like this, what's his name again now? This Alex Jones type character who talks about the Vatican a lot with all the rest of them. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways we can be deceived, Darryl. But I think it's important that we be deceived to some regard, because then we know what it's like.
Yep. And there's a number of good books already mentioned. A couple of them.
Don't get me wrong. I'm sorry, Darryl. I meant, we're going to be deceived in our lives. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, that's just.
We're only human.
Easy to believe a lie. There's so many liars around. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people don't think they're lying. They just, are repeating lies and not aware of it. That's all.
And you brought a good point out, because the people that do these things, the assassinations and the cover-ups, they put out what I call, and what a lot of other people call, they put out disinformation, they put out misinformation, they'll mix truth in with lies. They will try to do everything they can to put a whole smorgasbord of lies, half-truths, and a little bit of truth. It's just like rat poison is supposed to be, like 99% or 98% good food, but the poison's what kills you, the 1% to 2% poison. So, and that's what they do. And what they want to do is put out so much disinformation, misinformation, that they're going to try to discredit people. They're going to, like I say, call conspiracy nuts, and that use all kinds of different ad hominem attacks on them. They want to discourage any true research or investigation, and they want to put so many minefields in front of people that they're going to get discouraged, or they're just going to throw their hands up in the air and give up and say, there's too much lies and everything to wade through. I can't do it. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of good books out there. I already mentioned about the JFK assassination. And when you start reading all these books, they may not tell you about the secret society connections, but most of them tell you, and as the same way as Oliver Stone's tremendous documentary, JFK, at least shows you the mafiosi ties, the intelligence community ties, and it ties it all together so that you get to see the massive conspiracy. I mentioned the two of the books that is what the basis of Oliver Stone's. And again, that's a good movie for showing how the intelligence community works with the organized crime, etc. Crossfire by Jim Marrs and On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. Those are both tremendous books, very large books that show you a lot of the facts, true conspiracy facts. On the Trail of the JFK Assassins, pretty close to the same as On the Trail of the Assassins title, but that's by Dick Russell. It's a good book. I mentioned Fletcher Prouty. He was then a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. L. Fletcher Prouty wrote The Secret Team that shows how John Kennedy was going to try to wind down the Vietnam War. Another good book I mentioned, that CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys by Patrick Nolan. And then Trauma Room 1, the JFK medical cover-up exposed by Charles A. Crenshaw. I believe he was one of the Parkland doctors. This is an MD. And these guys, there were a number of doctors and nurses that all saw that Kennedy had a massive wound in the back of his head, and a good bit of his brains were missing. And of course, some of the brains that they did collect, they're now missing, that people can't, ever go back and look at that. So there's a lot of medical things that have been brought out in some really good books that have come out recently. So again, there's a lot of good. Dr. Mary's Monkey ties in a lot of the cancer research and stuff that was going on, and the death of one of the doctors that was involved there. You have Mary's Mosaic, which is about one of JFK's girlfriends, but it was the wife of one of the CIA guys. She was murdered while she was jogging. So like I said, this net goes out and covers so many people afterwards. I'm looking at a book called Dead Wrong. It gets into a lot of the people that were assassinated. I've got a book here, JFK in Vietnam, by John M. Newman, that gets into how the subtitle is Deception, Intrigue, and the Struggle for Power. Shows very much how John Kennedy was against that. that war. He didn't want to expand it. He was sickened by just even the small amount of the advisors that were being killed, American U.S. servicemen that were being killed over there. That sickened him. And that country, by the way, South Vietnam, before it unified and was taken over by North Vietnam, became Vietnam. But when it was a separate country, South Vietnam, that was a country that was 90% Buddhist, but 10% Catholic. And the Roman Catholics were kind of imported in from, brought in to the South, and they set up a Roman Catholic dictatorship run by these three brothers, President Diem and the Archbishop of Wei and the head of security. They were all fanatic Roman Catholics, and that's why you had some different Buddhist monks and that were setting themselves on fire in protest, because you had a Roman Catholic dictatorship in a country that was 90% Buddhist. And these guys, these three brothers, were put into power by none other than Pope Pius XII, who they want to make a saint. I hope that one's still on the back burner. And then they were put in by one of the Dulles brothers there, and of course Francis Cardinal Spellman. So some very powerful people in the United States and in the Vatican put these three Roman Catholics into power, and we can thank the Vietnam War and the thousands of American men that were killed over there and wounded. We can lay that on the doorstep of the Vatican, and almost nobody talks about that. The Vietnam War, and of course we've got people that, Avro Manhattan wrote a book about it, and so we had a few people try to explain. Avro Manhattan also wrote a tremendous book about the Holocaust in Croatia. He called it the Vatican's Holocaust. And in Croatia there we had, you probably had between 700,000 to 1 million, and it's probably closer to the million figure, of Serb Orthodox Christians that were murdered by the Roman Catholic Ustashi. There's a story that's pretty much fallen through the cracks of history. We had mentioned at one time before, and this is really important, there's a tremendous video out there that was put out by my friend Richard Bennett, who was a Dominican priest for 22 years. Now, he's pretty much retired with the Berean Beacon, but he put out a 58-minute color DVD, and you can still go up on YouTube, and if you just type in Richard Bennett, The Inquisition, the official title of the DVD initially was The Inquisition, 605 Years of Papal Torture and Death. That video gets into not only the horrible Inquisition with all of its torture instruments, but that video also gets into the Albigensian Crusades, where they brought in professional soldiers coming back from the Crusades and sent them down into southern France to slaughter Bible-believing Christians. And it also gets into that horrible Holocaust that was carried out by the Roman Catholic Ustashi in the fascist state of Croatia, again, that took the lives of between 700,000 to 1 million innocent Serb Orthodox Christians, where they were burying people alive, skinning people alive, setting people on fire, crucifying Orthodox priests to wooden doors, the rape and carnage, and often led by a Franciscan clergyman, and totally orchestrated and run by two Jesuits, by the way, that were in archbishop positions, and I hope I'm pronouncing their names close to being right, but Ivan Sarich and Aloysius Stepanich or Stepanich, I've heard. And again, I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation, but those two guys orchestrated and led one of the most brutal, for inch on the ground in all of Europe during World War II Holocaust, genocide against these innocent Serb Orthodox Christians, men, women, and children and elderly, were killed mostly by the Roman Catholic Ostashi, sort of like Catholic action guys, and I don't know if there's anybody out there that can explain how you can do that to innocent people. To the tune of almost up to 1 million people killed just because you're not of the same Roman Catholic faith. And has anything changed? I'm not sure, because all of the Inquisition stuff is still on the books. They never took away all of their records on how to torture people. And, of course, we've seen that throughout much of modern history, where many of these torture things have been taught to these right-wing, pretty much to right-wing regimes in Latin America, in South and Central America, where these people, it's usually church and state working together to brutalize people, to kidnap people, to toss people out of helicopters into the ocean. Just this stuff still goes on, and we can't pretend it isn't there. We can't sweep it under the rug. It needs to be brought out, and I'd urge people to read some of those books that I mentioned. The Vatican's Holocaust by Avro Manhattan, Edmund Paris's book, Secret History of the Jesuits, that Chick Publications offers. There's a lot of good books out there if people will do the digging, and the books are still available. And as we mentioned, you can sometimes go up and find a video like that YouTube video it's hosted by Richard Bennett, again, a former Dominican priest of 22 years, and Michael D. Simlian, who passed away not too long ago. But those two men co-host that tremendous 58-minute video. And if you just type in The Inquisition and Richard Bennett, and it's going to be one of the top ones that pop up there, I urge everyone to sit down and watch that 58-minute color DVD, pretty professional, done, and covering 3 different massacres and genocide that folks need to remember. We all need to remember that, because a lot of people died and some of them just for their witness for Christ, but some of them simply because they happened to be of the wrong faith. Like if you're living in a Roman Catholic country and you happen to be an Orthodox Christian. So we ought to set up and notice these things, because history has a nasty habit of repeating itself, and as the famous Spanish-born American philosopher George Santayana, I use that in a lot of my writings, his quote, I think he said that the people that don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, to paraphrase him. And that's true, history repeats itself over and over and over again. And when we don't learn, we don't watch, then World War I snuck up kind of on people. You could see signs it was coming. A lot of people didn't think it would happen. World War II, the same thing. And of course, Edmund Paris brings that very good in his book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, how the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, and its Jesuits were very, very active in fomenting both World War I and World War II, which ought to give us thought or pause when we think about maybe World War III getting fomented and started right now in the Middle East. But those books bring out the fact. And in that book, the one book, the PDF that you had told me about, what was the name of that one?
Rome Behind the Great War by J.A. Kensett.
J.A. Kensett, yep. Yeah. The Rome Behind the Great War that shows very much how Papal Rome and its Jesuits and that, but mostly Papal Rome, was Jesuit-controlled. Papal Rome was behind that.
That's a really interesting little PDF, Darryl, that's out there. People can just Google that topic and find it, or the title and find it. But, it's truth like that. It cuts through all of the jargon and all of the other issues and gets down to the Bible. It's that kind of truth that really sets us free in this day and age, I've found. And I'm so grateful for it. Little pieces, little bits and pieces like that of the historical puzzle really help. But, Darryl, just quick get back to this. In the 60s, we've been covering this a lot now with the JFK assassination and these other influential people at the time. In 1968, we were talking about all these murders. Well, did you know then in 1968, Darryl, there was a movie called 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yep, I saw it.
Directed by Stanley Kubrick.
Yep.
Now, if you know anything about Stanley Kubrick, he's a big player. And the the movies he did, how about this, A Clockwork Orange? That movie freaked me out. My brother and a couple of neighborhood friends came over to watch that movie one night. I think we were about maybe a quarter of the way through it. I had to leave the room. I had to just leave. I just could not tolerate that movie. And everyone else was watching it. I don't know why. Why didn't they just shut it off? I don't know. You know, it's just like the influence these kinds of movies can have is, you know, really something. And then the last movie that Stanley Kubrick made was this Eyes Wide Shut. What a strange movie. You've watched that, Darryl, have you?
Yeah, I think I've got here a couple of his. I just typed his name in. He did Full Metal Jacket, which was about Vietnam.
Right.
So this guy's got quite a
repertoire,
a resume. He's got quite a resume
of
movies that he did.
Yeah, very influential. But anyway, this movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey, I was thinking about this the other day. It came out in 1968. That's 33 years before 2001.
That was a strange movie. I know. But, boy, I thought that was...
I don't think that's no coincidence, man.
No.
Yeah, very strange movie, and it has a lot to do with the esoteric schools of learning, which has to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, which has to do with the corrupted versions of the Bible, which has to do with the First Vatican Council, on and on and on and on and on. I mean...
He's definitely a big player because I'll tell you, you ought to, if you look on Wikipedia, you ought to see the write-up that they've got on this guy. This is one of the biggest write-ups on anybody that I ever saw in my life.
Talk about celebrated, right?
This guy is big stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just looking here. I can't believe how massive. Of course, I'm not a big fan of Wikipedia because it's been very sanitized.
The thing is someone's got to tell the story, and if Rome's telling the story, it's all right as long as you know it's Rome telling you the story.
Yeah, you need to know that.
Yeah, you do. And that's part of what growing up is all about, really coming to the knowledge of the modified truth. Can we call it that?
Yeah. Sanitized, edited.
Homogenized, or should we say Monsantoized, you know, the GMO version of, you know, how can one call food, something that God created, and man likes to, okay, we can have this green movement and we can make the world much more productive. Well, I don't know about that. I think seductive is more a word to use here. It's all about, this sophistication. The old definition of sophistication is adultery. I think that fits perfectly.
Yep.
That defines the day and age we live in. It is a sophisticated, adulterated day and age. It really is, to me.
Yeah. Here's a couple more books just to mention. Because there's a lot of good books out there. A Cruel and Shocking Act, The Secret History of the Kennedy Assassination by Philip Shannon, or I believe Shenon. So there's, again, a lot of good books. And what he says here is what the book quickly became, however, is a much larger one. Shannon discovered that much of the truth about the president's assassination had still not been told, and that much evidence was covered up or destroyed, shredded, incinerated, or erased by the CIA, the FBI, and others in power in Washington. So he gets into Alan Dulles, Richard Helms, and a number of the CIA's treacherous mole hunter, James Jesus Angleton. I don't like to say he should never pick that name. But anyway, he was the longtime head of counterintelligence. Very powerful man. He sat the Vatican desk as well as the Israel desk within the CIA, but he was known as the big mole hunter. And basically what he did was he was looking for good people, and he was a tool of the Vatican. And so there are just a lot of good books out there. I'm just going through my little working aid here, and I'm looking for a couple more of I'm looking at right now, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron, Waldron. He also wrote The Legacy of Secrecy. So there are just a whole bunch of good books out there that here, and I mentioned the CIA Rogues, that's very good. Let me see here. Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy. I mentioned that. Jim Marrs, that's very good. Here's a good book, Dark Alliance, The CIA, the Contras, and the Crack Cocaine Explosion. That got this guy suicided, Gary Webb. Tremendous book. Now, while it doesn't get into the assassinations, it still gets into the involvement of spook agencies with the Contras and the CIA drug trafficking and illegal gun running, et cetera, et cetera. Here's a tremendous book, Defrauding America, Encyclopedia of Secret Operations by the CIA, DEA, and Other Covert Agencies by Rodney Stitch, S-T-I-C-H, 753-page hardcover book. That gets into a lot of the FBI, CIA, DIA, DEA, and other covert agencies, and the whistleblowers from those agencies that, pretty much got...
Darryl, that reminds me, you had found a video on him. Mr. Stitch, is it?
Yep, Rodney Stitch, S-T-I-C-H.
You had found a really good video on him, and I watched it, and I was really impressed with...
This guy wrote...
He's a very, very concerned man.
He was a prolific writer. He wrote like 500, 600, 7-page books, and he wrote, I think, 20 to 30 or something of them. He did a great job. Here's another good book. I mentioned that, Dr. Mary's Monkey, How the Unsolved Murder of a Doctor, a Secret Laboratory in New Orleans, and Cancer-Causing Monkey Viruses are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, and emerging global epidemics. There are a lot of good books, again, that tie... This thing goes a lot further than just the murder or assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It gets into a lot of other things that we need to know about. Here's another really good book I just picked up not too long ago. In case you haven't noticed, folks, I've got about probably 3 dozen books on just the JFK assassination. But this book is called Headshot, The Science Behind the JFK Assassination by G. Paul Chambers, 260-page book, and it gets into the science of it. And it says here, let's see, Headshot scientifically resolves one of the most enduring mysteries of our nation's history. During a 15-year career as an experimental physicist for the U.S. Navy, Dr. G. Paul Chambers has produced the first work on the subject to use the laws of physics and motion to identify the real murder weapon in the murder of John Kennedy, prove the locations of the assassins, demonstrate a conspiracy, and it says further, Headshot examines the conflicting evidence and data, the hopelessly flawed work of the Warren Commission, which I call the Warren Whitewash Commission, the inconclusive determinations of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, eyewitness reports of the Zapruder film, which was really messed with, and much more, etc. This we're getting a lot of stuff. Here's a hidden history and expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. A very good book by Donald Jeffries. A lot of these books are published by Skyhorse Publishing. They're getting a lot of books out about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and other suspicious crimes that we've had throughout history. I'm just so many books. I'm so thankful
Darryl,
that
there was that video. Former FAA investigator exposes 9/11 attack and CIA. Rodney Stitch, 2002. That's the title.
Yeah, I think he's got about 30 books. I think if you go up there, you're going to find most of them are 500 to 700 pages long. This guy was one of the most prolific writers out there. I mentioned JFK in Vietnam, Deception, Intrigue, and the Struggle for Power by John M. Newman, a tremendous book. I could probably give about 30 different, again, that JFK director's cut by Oliver Stone, starring Kevin Costner as New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. That's a 205-minute movie, but again, it's a tremendous book, or a tremendous DVD video.
Darryl, as far as I can tell, almost all of the books and videos that you have recommended, audios too, by the way, are really worth the time. I have not really had any bad recommendations from you. I've checked everything out, and it all matches up pretty much spot on, you know? And
so again, we're lucky. Go ahead. We're lucky that we've had people that had the courage to go out and investigate in that, because not a few witnesses turned up dead, and there were famous people. Dorothy Kilgallen, she had an exclusive interview with Jack Ruby, who was the mafiosi guy that in Dallas.
Yeah, Darryl, I got to say something on that. Because,
sure.
I mean, not specifically, but this whole thing about glorifying the mafia in the United States is just off the charts.
Yes.
I mean, they really have, if we can say Hollywood has done a really good job of something, they've done a really good job of making the American people just buy right into the glorification of the mafia.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's actually really, really sickening. But, yeah, hell on earth. That's what's going on. I mean, boy. I mean, that's the sad thing. You know, America has been so subtly deceived so much. I mean, how much can it continue, Darryl?
Yeah. Here's a book about...
one led to ask is how much farther, and you know, I guess it's going to go to the very end, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think the Lord's going to let too much more of this stuff keep going on. There's another good book about Bobby Kennedy, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the conspiracy and cover-up by two guys, William Turner and John Christian. Here's what it says. Around midnight, shortly after claiming victory in the California, he was going to probably be the next president had he lived. After claiming victory in the California presidential primary on June 5, 1968, Senator Robert Kennedy walked into a deadly spray of gunfire. Again, two people got behind him were the killers. Immediately, the Los Angeles Police Department concluded that the lone nut assassin again, Sirhan, had acted alone. The FBI conducted a parallel inquiry and concurred, and the vast majority of American people, initially anyway, accepted their opinion. In this compelling book, mysteriously suppressed in its initial publication, former FBI agent William Turner and investigative reporter John Christian exposed convincing evidence that Sirhan did not act alone. Again, I believe he was firing blanks. Based on more than 10 years of intensive research, Turner and Christian raised new and serious questions about RFK's murder. If they're going to get one book on RFK, I think it's the CIA rogues and the killing of the Kennedys is the best. But this book is also good. The assassination of Robert F. Kennedy makes the case that the murder of RFK and the subsequent police and government investigations bear all the hallmarks of the conspiracy surrounding the assassination of his brother, John F. Kennedy, and the resulting Warren Commission. So, again, there's just so many good books that are out there. If you do even a cursory amount of investigation, you're going to find out, again, that the world runs in conspiracy and that most people who are important, prominent, world leaders, important Americans, the prominent Americans that are murdered, you're going to find out that it's no lone nut assassin. It is a massive, well-orchestrated conspiracy that often includes a just as massively orchestrated conspiracy cover-up, the cover-up of the assassination. So again, a lot of good books, and we've mentioned there's another book, The Man Who Knew Too Much by Dick Russell. Again, he put out a good book there, but there are just a lot of books that are going to tie all of this together for you and show you that these intelligence agencies, some of the top law enforcement agencies, some of the corrupt police departments in major cities, and organized crime work hand in glove in assassinations and in cover-ups, et cetera, to the point where it makes you kind of makes your head spin sometimes that this occurs in our country, and yet we've got people like Rodney Stitch who has passed away, but that went and to great efforts, did a lot of research, put their lives not only at risk, but lost their fortunes, their homes, etc., in getting this information out to people.
Well, yeah, that's right, Darryl. And, you already made maybe the most important point as far as I'm concerned is that conspiracy is in the Bible. It's a part of our heritage that we have been deceived, we've been duped, we've been used, and we have been also involved in, for instance, mixing the holy with the profane.
Yeah.
And this is a big lesson that is not so easily learned, Darryl, I'm afraid. It's not very easily learned.
Let's close out with just two quick books here, and that is, here's another good one that I got recently, Who Killed Bobby? The Unsolved Murder of Robert F. Kennedy by Shane O'Sullivan, director of the film RFK Must Die. This is a 551-page hardcover book, and it gets into, again, a massive cover-up, again with a patsy, Sirhan, Bishara Sirhan, and, puts the blame there. He says Sirhan's gun held 8 bullets, but revealed here are new audio tests on the only known recording of the gunfire, suggesting that at least 10, most people think 13, but at least 10 shots. So if he's the guy that's doing the killing, even though he can't get close enough to shoot him from behind where he was really shot, if you've got more than 10 shots and he's got an 8-round revolver, there must be at least a second shooter. So again, a cursory investigation often shows that there's more than one person involved. Here's the last book I wanted to mention, and because this is an interesting book. Without Smoking Gun was the death of Lieutenant Commander William Pitzer. His full name was William Bruce Pitzer, part of the JFK assassination cover-up conspiracy by Kent Heiner. And again, the preface by a friend of mine, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin. So again, we have here some people exposing, and again, this network or this dragnet of dead people surrounding the Kennedy assassination went on over a decade or more after the assassination of JFK in 1963. I believe November 22nd was when he was gunned down by a massive conspiracy. So I think we've covered some very important things on here to let people know that the world really does run by conspiracy. And again, the key examples are Jesus Christ, that was killed by a church-state conspiracy that the Bible very much documents. Remember people saying, if you don't kill him, you're no friend of Caesar. They were threatening the Roman secular authorities that if they didn't kill the Lord Jesus Christ, that they were really enemies of the state. And so we just see this throughout history where church and state often cooperate in the murder of innocent people. And we could give example after example after example.
Man. Yep, this is hell on earth, Revelation chapter 12. That's a good study,
And again, I urge people to go up and watch that video, that 58-minute color video, The Inquisition, because you're going to see about 3 different murder sprees that was carried out by Papal Rome, and that is the Albigensian Crusades, the Inquisition, and that Holocaust. The Vatican's Holocaust is what Avro Manhattan called it. But again, it's called the Inquisition, 605 years of papal torture and death. And it's going to show you that this stuff is shot not only from way back in the Inquisition time, and that was at least 605 years of 6 centuries of torturing people and murdering people, that went into the 20th century in the 1940s, where the Roman Catholic Ostacci again killed between 700,000 and the figures closer to 1 million innocent Serb Orthodox Christians, men, women, and children, and elderly. And this in a time frame where I was born just a few years after that Holocaust happened. So you folks can tell I'm a little bit on the old side. I'm 72. But we need to remember history, and we need to remember the courageous people that have written about that history, and again, some of them risking their lives to write and let us know and warn us. So again, that Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, you want to find out who started World War I and World War II? There's the book right there. And that will show you, again, the world runs on conspiracies. And maybe we can have you title this, "The World Runs on Conspiracy," or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's
sure
the
does.
fact. And anyone that would argue against it is just going to be going along with the kings of the earth right now and their little procession down in the pit of hell. And I'm sorry, we're not going to join you. You know, we're going the other way. Because, you know, that's what the devil likes to do. He likes to take the truth and twists it around to his advantage. And he can only do that for so long. And, you know, the kings of the earth are going to wise up to this. It says right in the book of Revelation.
And
They're
again,
I hate the horror.
I'm going to urge people to check out Brett Norman's channels and stuff, what he has on YouTube. Check out Hour of the Truth by Jörg Blissman. Check out Tom Fress.
Inquisition Update. Yes, and you know, he's taking a break right now, and hopefully he'll get back to the mic, I hope, with doing some recordings. But, you know, he deserves a break. He's been doing this for 10 years, and it's really taken a toll on him. And, yeah, it's sad, you know, because there's so very few people that have that kind of, what can we say, fortitude, Darryl.
It takes you need a strong stomach sometimes, because
you really do.
You're reading about some people that just love to torture people, love to murder, not just murder one individual. They love to murder tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands.
It's not an easy subject.
Even millions.
This is not an easy subject.
Most credible historians, Richard Bennett brings this out on that his video, The Inquisition, 605 Years of Papal Torture and Death. He brings out that most credible historians, both he and Michael D. Semlon, say that up to 50 million Christians were murdered by the papacy.
Yeah, Darryl, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this recording with me today, because I was just thinking about you, and you know, it's really important to encourage you to keep going on the path that you're going. And you know, there's all these incredible books that you have read and you've taken the time to digest. That is not an easy task either.
No, and let's hope that again that folks will take advantage of some of the books that I mentioned and check them out. And I think once you get into this topic, for a lot of people, it can almost become a little addictive. Yes, but truth is addictive, right. And we need to find out.
Not only that, but critical thinking is so important. It's not being supported these days anymore, and that's one resource that I wish to support on my channel. In the little time that I have to devote to it, I don't have a huge amount of time, but I do have some time, and I want to be able to do a little something, and to get you to come to the mic, Darryl, and or to the telephone actually, and you know, do a little session on these things, because they're really important today. And I think it's sorely lacking in the environment that we're heading into now with the quote-unquote hate speech.
Right.
Where you cannot speak against any group. Any group.
We have to remember that the Lord Jesus Christ himself said that night cometh when no man can work. They're going to shut down everything, pretty much.
They're already on the way. They're well on the way. They might shut me down at any moment. But, have no fear of these men, because they're just men. And they're all working with this institution called the Papacy.
Yep.
Whether
I call
they
it
know
Jesuit.
It or not, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep, Jesuit-controlled papal Rome, and they're the ones that are pulling the strings. They're the ones that are fomenting the wars. They're the ones that are overthrowing governments, assassinating leaders, carrying out coups, and it's been well documented, again, in a number of books. So
that's the military end, but there's also the social and economic ends too. So it's like this trinity. It's like this Antichrist trinity of controlling all the markets, selling all goods. Jesus was really upset about making merchandise out of men. Think about it. It's really simple.
Yep.
We've had this Federal Reserve System now for well over 100 years. It's not going to change.
Most Bible scholars believe he cleansed the temple twice, but we do know that when we read the different accounts that he overturned the money changers' tables. He didn't like the fact that they were ripping off the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem when they exchanged their currency that they brought with them for the local currency to buy the doves, etc. They were ripping the people off. They turned religion into a money-making, profit-making scheme. And we see that today with indulgences and masses for the dead, and et cetera, et cetera. Things haven't changed a lot.
No, they really haven't. You have to take off the sophistication, the sophistry. Take that sophistry off of it, and you'll see it naked, and you can call it what it is,
Well, I want to thank you for having me on with this to talk about this subject, because I think it's a very important topic. And again, it's good to tell people, make sure you also not just read good books like this, but read your Bible. And as I was telling Brett before we started this, some of my favorite books in the Bible are in the Old Testament. We have one Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and there's some great books in the Old Testament. They're called Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. They're tremendous. Everything in the Bible proves true, whether it's for individuals or nations. You want to look at nations, what happens to nations that play the harlot on God, that shed innocent blood in their land, that kill the good people in the land. Take a look in the Old Testament. Look what God did to his northern kingdom of Israel. He brought the Assyrian Empire, an army in to crush the northern kingdom of Israel. And then the people in Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah, they didn't pay attention. They did the same thing. They killed their prophets and preachers, and they shed innocent blood. They filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. The Bible says King Manasseh of Judah did it, and God held the people accountable. He brought in the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, and he destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah. So we need to sit up and pay attention that God will tolerate a nation shedding innocent blood and killing the innocent for so long, and then he says, that's it. That's enough. And he used other wicked kingdoms to punish, again, the northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. We better sit up and pay attention here in America.
Yeah, that's right, Darryl. You got that straight. And around the world, for that matter, too.
Yep.
We cannot grasp the realities that are going on in any given place, except for where we live. We're all only partially aware of the full reality that we're living in today. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on, and most of it we might not know about because we don't have any real communication. So, I mean, in terms of, getting down to this indoctrination, the nitty-gritty of how the people are being misled. And that's, boy, I really don't like to see people misled, and I don't like to be misled either, Darryl. And that's why it's so important to separate oneself from things.
Yep. The Lord Jesus Christ said one of the biggest signs.
Not partially separate, protect what you have by means of prayer and it's private stuff. I mean, really when it comes down to it, the Bible defines pure religion, right? But men can't do it. They try all these rituals and all this other garbage. It doesn't work. So the church is in really bad shape.
Yeah. I think we did about an hour and a half here on conspiracy. So I think we put out enough information that shows the world really does run on conspiracies. And
absolutely.
And again, I thank you that you had me on to do this. And
yeah, anytime, Darryl. I'm hoping we can get some more good truth videos out there. And we might have to move to a different platform, but that's okay. I mean, that's how it's going to go. We'll try and put these up on YouTube still, and we'll do what we can. But as far as Yerk and I are concerned right now, we're looking at other platforms, and it looks like YouTube is going to go down really hard really soon, along with World War III and all the other BS crap that they're going to shove down our throat. Who knows? I mean, I don't know much, but Darryl, that seems to make a lot of sense to me, what you just said. That God will only tolerate so much, and then he's going to just slam it down.
And the two most important things to remember, folks, is Bible and prayer.
That's right.
Get as close to God as you can. We all need to do that. We need to have our noses studying the Bible, the entire Bible, Old and New Testaments, and we need to be consistent and persistent in our prayer. We need to get right with God in any area where we're wrong, repent, get right with God, because the bad times are coming. They're coming really. It's like a freight engine breaking loose coming down a mountain. Get ready, as we did in the military, my 20 years in the military. It's called contingency planning. You prepare, and Proverbs has a couple verses about it. It says that the prudent man sees trouble or danger coming, and he makes.
That's right.
He takes precautions. I urge everyone, read the Bible and pray. That's what I urge. And so, again, thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Darryl. We'll catch up with everyone next time. God bless, and bye-bye for now.